Can you tell me about your personal and professional background and what life experiences has shaped your career path?
Well, at the moment, I'm a YouTuber, but basically, I've been a broadcast journalist for about 20 years. I started at the country's the country's longest running English language news program. It's called Newsline. It's on Channel 11. I was there after I graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and this is back in the year 1999. So I came back after 97. I graduated at the end of 97. I was teaching English for about a few years. Then eventually I got a gig doing TV programming on Channel 11. And it's an English language news program that still runs until today. And it used to be a half-hour show. When I was there, I was anchoring the business news, and I was writing the script because I had some English language skills, and I took political science like you. So basically, that was my thing for a while. But eventually, I transitioned out of that into language, Thai language presentation. I started hosting a few television shows during the Iraq War, when the U.S. invaded Iraq after 9/11. So if you go back to about 2003 and 2004, I began to have more exposure. But eventually I became, quote unquote, kind of like the Bill O'Reilly and Rachel Maddow of Thailand, the talking head, the analysts. And even though I started out talking about, stocks and businesses, I thought that to have more influence in the media in general, I had to talk about Thai politics. So I gradually transformed my image into a political news analyst. Similarly to how Bill O'Reilly went from the anchor of a program called Inside Edition into the host of the O'Reilly Factor on Fox News. And just to talk about that briefly, essentially, it takes about like 5 years to get used to the camera and to be able to talk in front of the camera without a script. And once you are able to do that, then you can begin to use whatever is left in your brain from your education. And so you have to just remove the nerves. And that took about 5 years to get used to the camera. And eventually I started using my knowledge that I gained from education that I had in the US, including from Wisconsin and then from eventually Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. I started to use that into analyzing what's happening here politically, and then translating all of that into the Thai language for local viewers. And that transition took a long time. Essentially, my career began in about 1999, and then I started to actually make it right at the time before the military coup back in 2006. So previously I was working behind the scene doing the scripts. And then eventually I made it somewhat famous in 2004 and 5, and then became a bigger deal in 2006. That was essentially kind of like my 15 minutes of fame in Thailand, which lasted somewhat, for about a few years. But okay, that's the short story. Okay.
Could you explain what type of influence you wanted to have on Thailand being a political analysis?
Well, basically, if you take yourself back to the time when the Bush administration decided to invade Iraq, at that time, if you remember, I don't know if you remember, but at that time, a former aide to US President Richard Nixon, by the name of Roger Ailes, was hired by Rupert Murdoch to form Fox News Corporation. And this is back in 2002, 2003, right? And the idea behind Fox News, and I'll come back to Thailand and what I've done. The idea behind Fox News is to create these news programs where the anchor would take a side politically and be pro-Republican. A conservative news anchor would actually comment and would actually be able to get the viewers to watch and then make money. This is unusual. This model is really not impartial news. It's the idea that the news anchor using his influence, is able to influence the public to think a particular way. So Rupert Murdoch was very successful with the formation of Fox News, and it became a pro-Republican, pro-conservative network that had viewers and advertisement. And the guy who was the prime time anchor doing all of this is a guy by the name of Bill O'Reilly. Okay, that's 2003 in the US. What happened to me in 2005 and 6, right? And we had a coup back in 2006 that removed the then democratically elected Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra. I became kind of the talking head analyzing politics on not only Newsline on Channel 3 in English, but I was also that guy on Channel 3, which had a morning news program called เรื่องเล่าเช้านี้ เรื่องเล่าเช้านี้ is a morning news program, the equivalent of Good Morning America. And it would normally be impartial. Like it's a variety morning news talk show. But I was invited to join. And I kind of used that as a platform to espouse my pro-democratic views. So I was very much against the coup, right? And I think I used that to editorialize a lot, in a way that is almost unseen for a mainstream network and for an established news anchor to start saying right in the morning, when people are waking up that, hey, the coup is not good and I want to rip the Constitution apart. I want to rip the Constitution that is written by the military coup leaders. I want to throw the entire Constitution away because we had a Constitution that was drafted by the army. So I wanted to throw that out. So I was very upfront with my views right at the time when the coup was popular. So the coup in 2006 had a lot of support from Bangkokians. And the movement to oust Thaksin Shinawatra had a large gathering of supporters of Bangkok intelligentsia and also Bangkokians in general, and people who are against Thaksin, and people who are trying to drive out corruption. And so it had a large following. So my take being anti-coup was seen as a bit controversial to go that mainstream. So I was known as the talking head, pro-democracy guy who's willing to let his image be tarnished by being labeled as a pro-Thaksin dude. So being labeled as a pro-Thaksin dude is a dude like D-U-D-E, dude. Being labeled as a pro-Thaksin dude is kind of a negative image that is kind of difficult to have on you for a long time, because once you get that label, it's not positive. So that's what happened. So my original goal, basically, I was trying to, because I'm a student of politics, I'm trying to create a more complete democracy in Thailand. I'm trying to, so basically I didn't really take a class in journalism. I did not view myself as a journalist. Even though I was an established broadcast journalist, I view myself as an agent of change to create democracy in Thailand. And so that's why I did all of that.
Do you think that being pro-democracy goes hand in hand with being pro-Thaksin?
At that time, it seemed like it was the case. Because at that time...
Despite his corruption?
Yeah. At that time, because the problem in Thailand is that you have recurringly a phenomenon that people, would try to help drive out corruption, but it ends up leading to a military coup d'etat of some sort. So that essentially happens recurringly with many governments, including Thaksin's government. So you have bouts of corruption in various numbers of governments, but then oftentimes it basically leads to a popular uprising, and then the military would step in and then use that as an opportunity to remove that democratically elected government. And so what I was trying to do basically over that time, during the years of 2004, 5, 6, and 7, is to basically tell all my viewers that don't fall into that trap again, because normally Thailand does fall into that trap, and then we go back to another vicious cycle whereby you have a military coup, and then you have a new constitution, and then you also have a bunch of things added to that new constitution. And then you have an election again, and then somebody else comes to power, and then that government is, after a while, corrupt again, and then the military takes charge again. So the military is always waiting the wings to come into power. So the military is kind of an entity on its own, meaning that it has the ability to remove democratically elected governments. And it does it once in a while when a government is seen as corrupt to the point whereby there's no other solution, right? So I was basically trying to point out that it's not worth tearing apart the Constitution, even if the government has corruption problems. So that was my main message. But that message was extremely controversial because the Thaksin government was seen as corrupt. And so it was portrayed in a way as if I'm willing to, it was portrayed basically in the mainstream media at that point that I was a guy who was willing to tolerate corruption because I was anti-coup. But anyway, but that's actually in 2006, 7, and 8. Eventually, the entire pro-democracy movement was seen as what it is, and was seen as more anti-coup than pro-Thaksin, right? So this is so the story I'm telling you is is the story back in 06, 07, and 08. Now, with what happened after, just to sum it briefly, what happened after the formation of the Samak Suntarawet government, right, which is essentially a representative of Thaksin, and also the formation of the Yingluck Shinawatra government, which is essentially also a representative of Thaksin. You have another military coup, and the military coup back in 2014 brought to power General Prayut Chan-o-cha. Now, the issue with what happened with General Prayut is that he stayed in power so long that the majority of the public came to view the military coup as a negative thing. So with General Suryut, he was in power only for a year, right? So he was not in power long enough for the Thai people in general to be anti-coup. So they view military leaders as only stepping in once in a while to remove a corrupt government. That was kind of that was the story that the general public was willing to believe, because General Suryut only stayed for a year. But with General Prayut, he stayed for 2 terms, right? He won an election as well after the first term. And so after he was in power for almost 2 full terms, the general public came to view military coups as something that is problematic on its own. Now, this is a phenomenon that eventually happened, but was my goal all along. Because my goal all along was to point out this, and that Thaksin Shinawatra, though, could be a problem, the military on its own, if it's willing to stay on and cling to power for a long time, can be a problem as well. So basically, my goal was achieved. My goal was achieved. So basically, if you take a poll back in the previous election, right? If you go back 2 years, we're in 68, so we're in 2025. If you go back to the election in 2023, the majority of the Thai public was tired with the military. So the majority of the Thai public was willing to either elect Pheu Thai or Kao Klai to be in office. So that's why the Pheu Thai and Kao Klai coalition won the majority of the votes, right? It was basically anti-military now, anti-coup and anti-Prayut, because people were tired of Prayut, because Prayut was there for almost 2 full terms. So basically my goal at the end of this at the end of this long road, back in, you could say that it started back when I started at Newsline. But my goal from that point has basically been achieved. So and a lot of it was done through my time at Voice TV as well. Doing basically was something that's similar to what I mentioned to you, what Bill O'Reilly does at Fox News. But instead of him being pro-Republican, I was just pro-democracy. So I was espousing the pro-democracy view, on Newsline, on Voice TV, on all of these shows that I do, including the one on Channel 3 that I was there briefly. But essentially my aim was achieved. My aim of basically telling my viewers that not only is the military here for the long term and they could successfully intervene in politics anytime that they would like, and also they create institutions that stay there for the long term in the form of a constitutional court and all that too. So my aim has kind of been achieved. Okay. If you go back to what I told you earlier, doing the news, using it as a platform to create democracy. So the people in Thailand now in general, they're more in favor of an actual functioning democracy. And they're not actually under the spell of Thaksin Shinawatra either. So they prefer elections. And at the same time, they could go for other parties as well, which could include the Orange Party. I use the term Orange because their names have been changed 3 times, so I have to.
Before we talk about the constitutional courts, I want to go back to 2006 a little bit. Do you think Thailand would have fallen into more political instability if Thaksin was still in power and the coup didn't happen?
Okay, now, although this is a good question.
Also with him presenting himself as larger than the monarchy, because that would have angered a lot of more political elites, right?
I don't view him as presenting himself as that, as you mentioned, back during that time. That was a charge thrown at him by his haters. But he was not ever going to be successful at that if you frame it as that. That's an impossible mission to do. So I don't think he was portrayed as trying to do something like that. But I would say that that's an unrealistic portrayal of him. To me, he was just a popular politician carrying out policies. And I view the entire Yellow Shirt movement as legitimate and is able to gather a lot of supporters. I view that as a gathering storm that eventually would lead to his fall, regardless of the military coup. Now, but the problem in Thailand is just what I mentioned to you. You have people who come out to protest. You got some who believe deep down that the military would carry out a coup, right? Many people deep down believe that the military would eventually do that. But many people also come out and they create a legitimate, a legitimate movement to oust a democratically elected leader, which would force some sort of an eventual resignation. That happens in many societies without the military intervening. So I think my short question to you is that if the military did not remove him and had it been allowed for the protests to continue to go on, I believe that would be strong enough to force him to step down in due time. Now, it may have taken a few more years, and it may have taken actions by the courts, and it may have taken actions by the National Anti-Corruption Commission. But eventually, if he was corrupted, a few of the charges would have come to fruition, and that the courts would be able to deal a verdict out for him. Now, my take on this is very simple. Most courts in Thailand, which includes the the term คือศาลฎีกาแผนกคดีอาญาผู้ดำรงตำแหน่งทางการเมือง it's called the Supreme Court for political office holders. That's the technical translation, but there is probably another official translation. But that court is not under the control of politicians. And neither is the organization that is known as the National Anti-Corruption Commission. The National Anti-Corruption Commission used to be called the National Counter-Corruption Commission. They had a different translation change to it. But essentially it's called ปปช. PPCH was not under his control either. So back in 2006, eventually the National Anti-Corruption Commission and the Supreme Court for political office holders would be able to prosecute him if some of these corruption charges were valid. And that may have taken 6 months, a year or two, and the people protesting were gathering. It's a gathering storm. We're talking about like 100,000 people at least, yellow shirts. And to me, that would be a legitimate ousting of a democratically elected prime minister. Here's the thing, to me, it's like this. Most military coups succeed if the prime minister or the president of a particular country is not that popular. But if a prime minister or president is popular in a controversial way, the easiest comparison is Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a tremendously divisive figure, but he is extremely hated and popular at the same time. So Donald Trump has a large gathering of supporters who are extremely loyal, right? At the same time, he has a lot of haters. He's very divisive. Now, in this case, if you launch a coup in the US, like if we carry out a coup right now in the US, it would create turmoil, even though I believe he should be removed. It would create turmoil to the point whereby the streets would turn bloody because his supporters are adamantly in favor of him. What I'm saying is this: military coups take place and succeed and do not create uncontrollable fallouts when that democratically elected leader is not too popular. If that democratically elected leader has a strong support base, like Trump or Thaksin, you cannot do a coup to remove him because it would create too much fallout. I could give you names and examples of democratically elected prime ministers and presidents across the world that you could carry out a coup and there would not be a strong bloody fallout. Because many politicians, believe it or not, across the globe are not that popular. They're just there. They're very I could name you a few British prime ministers who nobody care about, like Rishi Sunak.
Stanford grad.
Yeah. A guy who has no strong following. That type of figure you can remove through a coup. And the military would be able to get away with it. And it would not create too much social chaos. And that's why, if you go back to previous military coups in Thailand, that's why it didn't create systemic disruption. Because the previous prime ministers that were removed through coup d'etats were not that popular. They had some following, but they didn't have the kind of following that Thaksin had. So Thaksin has a following similar to a Trump following. Now, would you do a coup against Trump right now? I mean, the fallout would be nuts, right? His followers would come to the streets and it would be crazy. It's not worth it. Now, that's not to say that he should not be removed, but there has to be a way of removing a democratically elected leader that is constitutional, or at least in a way that would not have major damaging outcome to the system. Or to the hearts and minds of the people who elected the guy. So that's my answer to your question. By removing him extra constitutionally, they made him a figure that is supported by people who wanted democracy, including a guy like me.
So do you think that bloodshed or social chaos was necessary if you wanted a majority to oust Thaksin instead of the military?
No, because in Thailand, this is the thing that many anti-Thaksin people did not accept, but the politicians don't control the courts. This is the actual fact. So basically, even at this point, right now, as we speak, if the current prime minister is got her hands in some, particular corrupt deal, right? The National Counter-Corruption Commission in Thailand is the equivalent of the Corruption Investigation Office in South Korea. It has the power to prosecute a sitting prime minister. This is not the case in the UK or in the US. In Thailand and in South Korea, it's a similar model. You have an independent organization that can launch a prosecution against a sitting prime minister. And once it does that, and it could have done that with Thaksin, it was getting there actually, but it didn't have enough evidence on things that he was, supposedly corrupt. Because some of the allegations were not true. Some of the allegations were true. But you can't shortcut the whole investigative process. But that was going to take place eventually. And eventually, if you launch a full-scale prosecution, these cases would go up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court is not beholden to the democratically elected Prime Minister of Thailand, nor is it beholden to even the democratically elected President of South Korea cannot control the Corruption Investigation Office. It's kind of become an animal on its own, really. I mean, which is another problem, because it could be captured by another power. But for example, in South Korea, you got basically almost every democratically elected president after getting out of office going to jail.
Okay.
That's a problem on its own, meaning that the scrutiny is so much that nobody survived. But okay, in Thailand it's not like that. But what I'm saying is that you can prosecute a sitting prime minister.
Yeah.
Systemically, it can happen. That's actually one of the pluses. That's why you actually don't need the coup. But anyway, but sometimes you have a coup because of other reasons. But I'm saying it's wise not to have it unless you're sure that the supporter of the guy is willing to take the hit in the stomach. Right? If people don't love Trump so much, it would be easy to remove him. But you got these loyal followers that are willing to risk their lives for him. So it's probably not wise to remove him extra-constitutionally.
And let's talk more about constitutional courts in Thailand.
Okay, but the Constitutional Court is altogether a different animal from the Supreme Court, which is respected.
In the video I watched reporting last year, you described Thailand as a dictatorial juristocracy and a constitutional monarchy. Could you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, basically it's like this. Okay, like I mentioned to you, Papa Shaw. Papa Shaw is at this moment, Papa Shaw, the National Anti-Corruption Commission is selected by the Senate, right? The Senate is not democratically elected. Okay. Now, previously, and this I'll go back to the idea of the Constitutional Court that I mentioned to you. Previously, if you go back to 1991 and 1992, if you remember, we had a coup, right? Okay. 1991, we had a coup. And then 1990 coup, we have an uprising. It's called Prisapatamin. Okay. After that uprising, there was a national drive to draft a new constitution. And eventually, after that uprising, it's called Black May, right, in 1992. That uprising, there was a drive to draft a new constitution. And the drive to draft that new constitution was done under the guidance of Prime Minister back then, Kun Banhan Silapasha. Okay. Anyway, to make a long story short, Thailand came out with the constitution in about 1995, 96, yeah? And that constitution is known locally as Ratta Thammanun 40. It's known in English language terms, it's known as the 1997 Constitution. And basically that constitution is known as the People's Constitution. Basically, the idea behind that is that you would have these independent organizations, National Anti-Corruption Commission, Constitutional Court, right? These two in particular, right? Election Commission as well. Election Commission, National Anti-Corruption Commission, the EC, the NACC, and the crown jewel, the Constitutional Court. The Constitutional Court, the crown jewel. So the three pillars, if you remember, the three pillars of the 1997 Constitution is the EC, the Election Commission, the National Anti-Corruption Commission, the NACC, and the crown jewel, the Constitutional Court. These three bodies would be in charge of basically having the power to remove democratically elected politicians seen as corrupt or violating the law, whatever. Okay, there's a bunch of things that could fall into that category. Now, in that People Constitution, 1997 Constitution, they made sure that these organizations are accountable to the people. So they basically put a democratically elected Senate in charge of selecting these bodies.
Okay.
All right, okay. That was the idea. Now, what happened leading up to the coup, and this literally happened. What happened leading up to the coup in 2006, right? Like I told you, right? There are ways of removing a democratically elected prime minister back in 2006 and 7 and 8 eventually with a real popular uprising, which was happening. But gradually, it takes time, right? Like in the Philippines when they removed Marcos. But people in the army and also people in the legal establishment also view that there was a problem with the 1997 Constitution. Because the 1997 Constitution had these three pillars, the EC, the NACC, and the Constitutional Court. And the three pillars were accountable eventually to a democratically elected Senate. That was the mistake. That was the mistake viewed by pro-military types, that the Senate cannot be fully elected. Because if the Senate is elected, that means the politicians would control the Constitutional Court, the three pillars, right? That is really one of the main reasons why you had the coup in 2006. The coup in 2006 is to redraft a constitution to make sure that the Senate is not elected. Because the Senate, you see this fight, you have what's happening today, like literally like today. This fight over the Senate right now between Pheu Thai and Phum Chai Thai is the fight over the ability to control the selection of the three pillars.
Yeah.
Because the three pillars can end anyone who's already a sitting politician in office.
Okay.
The three pillars can remove a prime minister. You don't even need the army.
Yeah.
Okay. Any MP as well. Okay. One of the main reasons why you had a coup in 2006 is to redraft the constitution and to make sure that the Senate is not elected. And so what they did in 2006 with the new constitution is to make sure that the Senate is only 50% elected. 49. So it was like 50-50. They split it. They made sure that the people had the opportunity to elect half of it. The other half came by appointments, and appointments from judges and so forth. It's normally like a group of judges who are for the most part, they're okay. They're not corrupt judges, but I'm saying like basically a group of judges would appoint some of these, or a group of, it's a long process, but essentially it's half-half.
Yeah.
Okay. But that was not enough. And basically, when you had a coup again in 2014, they made sure that the entire Senate had to not be elected in order to control. Nobody calls it the three pillars, but I call it the three pillars because it's the pillars that make this constitution a constitution that the pro-democracy, pro-politician wing wants to change. Because this current constitution that we had that came through a coup in 2014 was a completion of the taking over of the Senate. So instead of the half and half, so we had a constitution called the 2550, รัฐธรรมนูญ 2550. So 40, it's full elected. 50, half and half, that's not enough because the politicians still control like half of it. So they had to redo it. It's a redo. So 2014, when Prayut launched the coup, that's a redo of 2006. So he redid it, but it's different army leader, but they redid it. And then the Senate is entirely selected. Now, the Senate was entirely selected by General Prayut until the election. Now the Senate, under the fully formed constitution, this one we have, now the Senate is entirely selected. But then the politicians want to have a say. So they try to meddle in the selection process. So it's become a mess, basically. It's become a mess, but all of this leads back to the Constitutional Court that I talked to you about. The issue is that all of these politicians want to be able to manipulate the Constitutional Court. Because if they can't, eventually one of these days, they could find themselves basically under the powers of the Constitutional Court and the National Anti-Corruption Commission. When the coup took place in 2014, one of the aim of the coup leaders is to control the Senate in full. And to control the Senate is to control the National Anti-Corruption Commission. And to control the Senate is also to control, in a way, indirectly, the Constitutional Court. And the Constitutional Court has the power to dissolve parties and also disqualify candidates. And basically, you don't need, what I said, dictatorial justocracy, right? You don't need the army to launch a coup anymore. Because if you notice, every time there is a coup, the military junta keeps. The military junta in Thailand is unique. It would kick out parliament. It would shut down the government and kick the prime minister. The prime minister goes home and the elected MPs go home. But the Constitutional Court and the National Anti-Corruption Commission all go back to work. It's so unique. Actually, it's strange because they don't have to tear up the Constitution, but they tear up the Constitution. But then they tell the National Anti-Corruption Commission and the Constitutional Court to go back to work. But then they tell the Prime Minister and the MPs to go home. So when I say that you actually don't need to launch a coup anymore, I mean, that's like, I'm serious about that. It's not a joke because you don't need it.
In the video that I watched of you last year, you said that Ung Eng was probably going to be ousted by a military coup in less than 2 years. Do you support that view?
No, because the belief, did I say that? No, because I think the dynamics have changed. Maybe I said, did I say that before?
It was just a few days after,
I think
August 6th, 17, 18, 2024.
2024, okay. No, but the view, I really, you cannot really predict in the end what the army will do, but the fact of the matter is, I think the common enemy of conservative circles in Thailand is still to prevent the Orange Party from taking power. So I don't think they actually mind that. Okay, when I use the term they at this point, it's kind of, okay, I'll come back to trying to answer your question. Okay. Okay, this is the key date you have to remember. Everything goes to the point of okay, I'm going to say this with full respect. The Prem era and the Post-Prem era. Okay, this is very basic. Okay, the Prem era And the post-Prem era, this is General Prem Tirusulanon, okay. Yeah. Former chairman of the Privy Council, former prime minister, a great man, okay. And probably the most successful prime minister in history, like in terms of just results. You know, one of the highly respected military officials of all time in the history of the kingdom. But basically, there's a Prem era and there's a post-Prem era. In the post-Prem era, which is basically, you know, you could date back to 2559. That would be what? 2559 is 8 years ago. So that would be 2017, right? Okay. So after his era, it's difficult to predict. So what would happen to any government? Because there is no one behind the scenes that could have the ability to go around and have the kind of influence that he had. So he is one of a kind. And I say this as a compliment, right? I say this as a compliment. I mean, to be successful in this country means to have political influence. To have political influence is not having, you know, 5 or 6 members of parliament working for you. I could form a political party and have about 20 or 30 members of parliament if I have enough money. I could launch a campaign and do that. That's having some influence. But having real influence is the ability to tell judges and the ability to tell army chiefs and ex-army chiefs what to do. So General Prem is extremely influential, and you're not going to find a guy like him today. So on the conservative side today, there is no one that would even come close to rivaling his level of influence. So in the post-Prem era, there is no new Prem. That means that any question you ask me or anybody else, you could find anybody in Thailand, nobody will actually know because nobody knows anything. Everybody is an outsider. So previously, basically, when you ask political analysts about what would happen to the courts, whether or not this politician will survive, whether or not there will be a coup, it was easy to predict because the only thing you had to do is to read the mind of General Prem. If you're a mind reader, if you know the behaviors and the strategies of General Prem, you could predict what would happen to a political party. I could tell you that Thaksin would face his downfall the day that he picked that fight with General Prem. I mean, it's not difficult to predict. But the problem is that any answer I give you in regards to the survivability of this government, at this point, it's difficult to gauge because there's no one in charge. There's nobody who has the powers to basically go around and tell the Constitutional Court to get rid of this guy. There's nobody that you could kind of predict and say that is making decisions, making the plans, making kind of a master plan for how the Thai political scene is going to look, 4 or 5 years from now. The military, even the military itself, you got army chiefs that are not as influential as former army chiefs during the Prem era. So coming back to whether or not Ung Ing would survive, I would basically have to answer it based on just what's happening politically. And based on what's happening politically, I view that at this point, they don't want the opposition to potentially win the election. So the most likely scenario is that they're going to ride this out until the end, because when there is an election, it is likely that the opposition Orange Party could win. And that would be seen as a threat to the regime, even though it's not a threat to the regime because the regime is secure. So I made this point like a long time ago that the Thai regime is secure in its standing. The Orange Party is not a threat to it. But because it's seen as a threat and has been dissolved twice, more than likely everyone is going to participate to make sure that the Ung administration stays in place as long as possible. You know, there are even talks that if this administration would eventually go away and Pheu Thai would lose the election, there has to be a way to make sure that the Orange Party does not come to power. But you have to devise a strategy on that front first and to have to make it not so obvious. And so, I mean, if you use the Constitutional Court, and at this point, I don't even want to say that if you use the Constitutional Court, because there could be nobody using the Constitutional Court. See, in the post-Prem era, you don't know what the heck is happening. The Constitutional Court could be its own animal. This is what I talked about when I mentioned this to you. The Constitutional Court could be its own animal. And if that's the case, then I'm basically predicting the minds of the judges, which is even more difficult. But at this point, I view that most of the conservative right-wing military types and constitutional court network supporters, they still view the Orange Party as the ultimate threat, even though it's really not. But so with that being the case, the Ung government will probably survive because it's not doing much. I'm not making a joke out of this. The only way to survive as a government in Thailand is that you don't shake things up too much. If you, for example, they campaign on to end military conscription, which they should end military conscription, but this government will not touch this. It's too afraid to. So it's too afraid to upset the higher ups in the military establishment. And so the Pheu Thai party is not touching this military conscription, even though they campaigned on it. The way to survive as a government is to actually not do too much. It's kind of a sad statement, but this is kind of true. So I think Ung will survive regardless of the fact that it's kind of an incompetent government. I mean, her father was competent, but was seen as corrupt, and that was his problem. He was seen as having these business interests. Yeah. So that was a problem, but he was effective as a leader, more so than she is.
Since we're on the topic of General Prem, can you explain his relationship with the monarchy and how he propped up the institution and as...
Okay, I have to skip the answer on this question because I want you to be able to quote me. So I'm going to let you quote me on everything that I gave you. And in order to do that, I have to not answer that question. So we have to skip past that.
So what do you talk about post-Bloody May, Thailand's longest democratic period, after King Rama IX had brought in the two political opposed leaders and told them to just clear the streets? What do you think about that situation and the reverence that the monarchy holds over political affairs? Because Thailand did go into the longest period of democratic rule post-1992 Bloody May.
Okay. 1992. Okay, I'm gonna try to answer your question in a way that is legally safe as well. I have to do that. Okay, because I want you to quote me. The whole point is doing this because normally when in papers and stuff, if it's not quoted, then it's not as much fun. But okay, I'm trying to give you a take that is more centered around what's happening in government. Meaning that I think after 1992, it was stable in a way that you mentioned, meaning that you're saying that it's a democratic era with no military interventions for a long time, and you're trying to figure out my opinion on why that was the case. It could be the case simply because following a crisis, it is unlikely that you would have another crisis for a while. This is it might sound stupid, but it's kind of what took place in a way. You have a mini crisis in 1992, right? But in 1992, it was not a systemic crisis. Basically, the system stabilized the disturbances. So to me, I'm going to coin this in a way that is safe, but I'm saying, like, to me, 1992 was not a systemic crisis, and that the system itself helped stabilize the influence, the political disturbances on the streets. Now, so what happened after that was kind of a realization on the part of the general public that, okay, democracy was a good thing. Military interventions are not necessarily productive, and that the military has a tendency to cling on to power. And so you do need a constitution that would prevent the army from getting involved, while at the same time form a lot of these independent organizations that would check and balance the politicians. That was that realization, that mass realization in the political sphere in Thailand, that you would need a constitution that would create bodies that would check and balance the politicians, while at the same time, so that we don't need the army to step in and to remove corrupt governments, right? This was kind of the idea. And I think because we took the time to draft that constitution, and also because we had a military coup in 1991, that's why you had that long period of stability. Now, but I think the long period of stability was possible because at that point, it no longer it was seen as illegitimate to launch any more military coups, because we already had one, and then it seemed that it wanted to cling on to power. So the military has no legitimacy or credibility to launch another coup for at least 5 years, right? And then we also had a financial crisis. And nobody was in the mood for anything, right? So you have a financial crisis, you had time to correct whatever was happening, economically. And that took another 3 or 4 years. So I'm not even going to read much into that period as why we had a long period of non-military intervention, because we had one, and then there was a crisis, right? And then we took a lot of time to draft a new constitution. And then we also had a financial crisis. So,
do you think the unity that King Ramanan brought during that period plays a part in that?
The unity was there. But if you mean, I think you're trying to figure out whether or not the unity of the people of the entire country on the issue of support for His Majesty to me is a wonderful thing. Now, if you're trying to figure out whether or not that unity means more or less support for military coups, or does it play it out in a way that allows people to view the coup in a negative or a positive fashion? You could link that in a way that is theoretical. Actually, you could link it in a way that would come to several conclusions. But I would not go further and make the conclusions to you. I could make the conclusions to you as the interplay, and this is I think what you're trying to get to is this point, which I think you can make the conclusions in your own dissertation. But instead of me making the conclusions for you, it's probably safer for me not to make the conclusion, but I'm saying that there is an interplay between the idea of unity in the country over a particular issue that is established, that creates a sense of togetherness for the country, which can be a healing process for the country. There is that idea. There is an interplay between that and support in favor or against a military coup. Now, normally, the military coups in Thailand, they understand this interplay. So basically, they don't do stupid shit in stupid times. They would do opportunistic shit in times that they can get away with it. All right? Okay. There is that interplay. And the army knows full well when to do what. If the mood of unity is a great thing, right? Until somebody disrupts it. So the military will never disrupt that mood of unity. But the military does use that mood of unity rather intelligently when they do want to remove a particular prime minister.
But do you think that was intelligently used?
No. At that time, it was authentic. Meaning that if you're talking about between 92 and 2006,
That makes sense.
it made sense. There was not going to be a coup anyway.
What about the constitutional courts now, though? I feel like they
But,
don't use it that intelligently.
No, okay, here's the thing. During the Prem era, I could tell you like a week beforehand what the Constitutional Court will do. Doesn't take a brain surgeon. It was predictable because that was its role, right? To dissolve parties and to force a change in the government. Now, I view the courts as at least being clear on the point that the Orange Party is not welcome. That's one clarity that I see. Now, at this point, I do not, but what's not clear is, and this is important, what's not clear is who has influence over the Constitutional Court. During the Prem era, it was clear, it was predictable, it was not difficult to analyze. But at this point, it's a bit difficult to analyze. So aside from being able to predict, for example, just the current party, the new, this is why I hate political dissolutions, because the parties continue to stay, but then you have to use a new name, which is stupid. The whole idea of dissolving political parties is stupid because, okay, so I have to waste my time. So I call it's the People's Party. Okay, Prak Prachachon. If the People's Party want to amend lèse majesty law, they would be dissolved automatically. It would be done in weeks because the Constitutional Court has made it clear because they did this already. So that we know. But aside from that, we don't really know. For example, if you present a case, somebody launched a case to dissolve Phum Chai Thai. So I was on a TV show and I made a comment that that's not happening because I'm trying to predict the mind of the courts. It's not there to dissolve Phum Chai Thai. It's there to dissolve, quote unquote, left wing. It's not really left wing, but quote unquote left wing parties. So it's basically at this point, that's as far as we know what it would do. But aside from that, it's just day-to-day work, not important stuff. But still, the term that I coined, dictatorial justocracy, I would still use that because even with a limited mandate that is predictable, the Constitutional Court, the Election Commission, and the National Anti-Corruption Commission can still basically prevent a party from getting to power. And it probably would do so again if Orange wins big next time. Unless they don't touch lèse majesty, which would be interesting, which I think they would not touch it. They could win big that way.
One of the reasons why they were dissolved is because they touched on it, they wanted to amend that.
Yeah, and
The video that I watched too, you said that you wanted the magistrate to be amended. In what ways?
Well, basically at this point, my take on this is this. The regime is secure. The Thai regime in the system is very secure. So I view that the current violations that is a problem is actually a violation of freedom of speech rights. So many Thai people, including academic types and also non-governmental organizations and pro-democracy protesters, do not have the ability to gather an armed force to make any systemic change to Thailand's politics. But what most of these, quote unquote, pro-reform or left of center types want is basically to be able to make comments about the regime in the way that is a constructive criticism. So to me, if you violate that by using 112, it's basically a misuse of 112. Now, if you use lèse majesty laws to go after people who try to form a militia, for example, in the US, there are militia groups who would try to overthrow a democratically elected president, and they would be hunted after. So if you have groups that would aim to violently overthrow a system, they must be arrested and prosecuted harshly. So in Thailand, basically, there's been a misuse of 112 to target, non-governmental types who want to campaign for free speech. And so you see a lot of young people ending up in jail simply because they are somewhat critical of the system, but in a very much non-violent fashion. So basically, my take on it is that you have a misuse of it, and the misusage of the law that violates basic human rights, if you have it continually, unless the governments are able to end the abuse of the laws, then the laws need to be amended. The law itself does not have to be amended if you read it correctly, and if you're a judge and you see a case and the police officers have filed 112 charges, and the guy who's being prosecuted basically made a critical comment about the regime, but he did not have the wherewithal and the intention to cause harm, then it's really a freedom of speech issue. But basically, you have judges who deal out guilty verdicts for these people, and they stay in jail for like 10 to 15 years, which is extremely harsh for non-violent offenders. So to me, unless the judges reform the way that they deal out the verdicts, which I don't see the judges doing that. The judges are dealing out very harsh verdicts. And so unless the judges change the way they deal out the verdicts and grant people bail and do a lot of stuff they need to do, then you have to amend the law. Now, but at this point, I think it's kind of a losing cause, meaning that if you aim, there's almost no point of bringing it up anymore politically, because if you bring it up politically as a party, you would be dissolved anyway. So it's kind of, the Constitutional Court has become an organ that can set this standard of policy now, which can be problematic. But it's like, this is an issue that's like, okay, we're past that, so basically I'm fighting now for ending military conscription. To me, it's like, the issue of 112 is like, okay, I have other things to do, right? I've said my piece. I'd rather focus on, trying to do other stuff, so.
And how does your background of being related to the royal family influence your political leanings?
No, basically, I separate my take politically from whoever is around me. So basically, it's like when I'm sitting here on camera and then when I'm on TV, I'm basically doing a live feed of my brain. So it's whatever is flowing through my brain at the moment, without really regards to the people I would talk to, like, tomorrow, or so. But my life is really not all that different from the very average person out there. So I don't spend time in quote unquote elite circles. I actually have no actual elites like around me. I don't hang out with rich people. I don't hang out with a bunch of blue bloods. I have a very almost below average life of a regular guy spending 80 baht a day eating at 7-Eleven. So so whatever my network is, it's almost like when I'm sitting here, I'm quite independent of that, because I'm doing kind of a live stream of my thoughts about what's happening in the regime, and I don't like. No, I have this thing where I don't like to see people suffering. This is kind of a strange thing. And I think most of the powerful and the rich people in this country have it pretty good. People who have special privilege have it pretty good, regardless of who they are. So I have a soft spot for people who, have to go to jail, and people who, do a lot of hard work.
So do you think that?
And that's not even from my years in the U.S. That's like within my DNA.
And so do you think that the monarchy and democracy are mutually inclusive or exclusive?
Oh, that's a good question, but I should not answer. I should not answer that, because let's skip that for now.
One of the big questions that I have in life, right? It's like, how do we progress towards a stable democracy while retaining the monarchy's historical and cultural values that instilled within the Thai people?
Okay. This is good. This is like a reaction video now. My reaction itself is probably better than the answer, because my inability to give you the answer is probably the answer. This is a good question. Okay, I'm going to answer your question, but is there another one that is basically part of this? This is part of the same question. The one before this and this one. Is there another one that is kind of a follow-up to this? Can I hear that one first? And I'm going to try to give you. I gave you, what is this? It's basically like, my standard is this. If you're on TV and you have to say something positive about everything, that's my way of trying to give you the answer, because the answer could come back to haunt me if I don't phrase it correctly. So okay, let's. I'm thinking. I'm trying to answer you, but I'm thinking at the same time. Okay. But okay, let's rephrase this again. You got to give me more. Is there a third one that is a follow-up to that?
Yeah, this is more about democratic reform.
Okay.
What institutional reforms would you prioritize to move Thailand out of what you described as a political quagmire? For example, you want to abolish the constitutional court, reform.
Okay, all right. I'll link that to your previous question, because I cannot answer your previous question correctly. No, I could, but I'm saying like I would not. Okay, here's the thing. Here's my take on this. At this point, my view in life on these issues is whatever you want. My take on this. I don't want to fight with people, because all these people in society want different things, right? And they probably have a different answer to your question. The first one, the second one, and the third one. But I think at the end of the day, okay, I'm going to try to answer this in a way that is constructive, and you can interpret it in a way that would give an answer to, any one of the three questions. But I'm saying, I think it depends on your definition of democracy.
What's your
This is the thing. Now, I'm trying to tell you that I don't have a personal definition of democracy. This is the only way I can answer this, because if I tell you my personal definition of democracy, then it would mean that I am totally convinced of my own definition. So for the sake of answering your question, I'm going to tell you that I'm not even convinced about my own definition because I'm not clear on my definition. But I think it depends. So the way I'm going to answer this is that it depends on your definition of democracy.
That's a good answer.
No, but it's like this, because some people view the definition of a democracy as the rule of law, right? Okay, the rule of law. But then some people view the definition of a democracy as the ability to elect a leader for society as a whole and nothing else, right? I don't want checks and balances. I don't want the courts to tell my prime minister or president what to do. I don't want an unelected Senate. I don't want a national counter-corruption commission. Okay. But then some people view, democracy as having checks and balances whereby the prime ministers or the presidents cannot do everything that he wants and that he cannot, he cannot violate a particular code of conduct or anything. I mean, this is actually the fight within Thailand and in the US as well, is that you have people who believe in using executive power as the executive campaigned. And then you also have people who believe in the application of law that is passed through a parliament as having and as being more important than executive power on policies that the president campaigned on. Now, okay. But then you also meet people who view that unless everyone is elected, then it's not a democracy. So you have a movement in Mexico of trying, I mean, they already have a president, but it's not enough. So they have to elect every single judge. And basically, Mexico just went through reform. Now they're going to elect every single judges. So I think to answer your question, it depends what you want. Now, if your definition of a democracy is to elect every office holder in every institution, then it will probably take you a while. And then once you get there, you'll probably hate the results because it's really some of the most basically, through a democratically elected system, if you elect everyone in every single office, from presidents to judges and everything else, that does not necessarily guarantee a meritocracy. And that, for the most part, it does not guarantee that you will get the most capable, nor efficient, nor good-hearted folks that would rise to the top. Now, but then in regimes that you have unelected office holders, that does not guarantee quality either. So, my answer to this is my realization, this is like a personal realization. My personal realization is that I'm going to use a bad word, and I don't want you to prod me further because I have this thing where I would tell the truth regardless of what happens, okay? But I don't want to do that right now. And I want you to be able to quote me. My take on this is that whatever regime you have, it can be fucked up, bad, anyway. If you have a bad guy in charge. Now, the problem is I see a lot of bad guy in charge right now in a lot of countries. Okay. All right. Okay. We have to move on from sensitive topics.
Could I ask if you had the power to redraft the Constitution?
Yeah, if I were Thanos, I use this on my show. If I were Thanos, what would I do? Okay, now we're getting to things that I can talk about. We can talk about hypothetical things that would not happen. You see, it's legally safe. No, number one, I would not have a constitutional court. I would not have it.
So how would you keep the Prime Minister in check?
The Prime Minister in Thailand is already in check. She cuts ribbons. This is the ribbon cutter. The Prime Minister, okay, and this is, okay, this is the thing. The Prime Ministership in Thailand is ceremonial. Okay. I'm doing a switch of what people normally think. People think, okay, Thailand is not a democracy. The Prime Minister is there for ceremonies.
So the military is in charge?
A lot of things are in charge. The military is part of it. That the Prime Minister is, to me, ceremonial. Now, I don't think you have to worry about keeping the Prime Minister in check. This is not a problem. Unless you have a really capable Prime Minister.
Like Patsy.
Yeah. But I'm saying that at this point, the Prime Minister is not the problem. Now, she can be inefficient, but, whatever. But
what about just international image?
But I'm saying that, okay, but my problem, my problem before all of that, the keeping the Prime Minister in check, which is, it's almost like if you ask me if we live in Korea and then you're worried about a corrupt politician in Korea. Most of them end up killing themselves. But I'm saying, but coming back to this topic where we can talk about. Well, number one, I think the main problem at hand for me, for Thailand, is this. Okay. It's not about keeping the Prime Minister in check or all of the other stuff. The main problem in Thailand right now is that when you have elections, these parties they're not able to come to power. This is the main problem. And previously, Thaksin's party faced these obstacles until Thaksin basically switched side. And when Thaksin switched side and basically is seen as joining forces with the army, the Senate voted for his daughter to become, and also Seta, to become Prime Minister. But when he switched side, basically he's seen as the bad guy now. So he's going to lose the next election. The problem is that you need to take away these organs. So if there is no constitutional court,
okay, so take that away.
No dissolution of parties, no disqualification of candidates. If you worry about whether if the Prime Minister is corrupt, there's an actual court. Then there's a National Anti-Corruption Commission.
But you want to reform that commission as well?
No, I can leave that. I don't mind. If we're going to eliminate one organ from the Constitution, the Constitutional Court goes first. Okay. It's the most problematic one. Okay. You can leave the other ones in charge, honestly. The National Anti-Corruption Commission can be a problem, but at least its mandate is corruption. I mean, you have to do something wrong for them to launch an investigation, right? Now, if they abuse power, they can become a problem. But at least they're not going to dissolve an entire party or disqualify a candidate who has not done anything really wrong for 10 years, for life. So you take away the Constitutional Court, that takes away 50% of the problem. The military does not have the capital, the political capital to launch a coup probably within 5 or 6 years at least. So that's not a problem either. Okay. So to me, really, I'm not kidding about this. You take the Constitutional Court out of the game. That's half the problem. Now you eliminate the process that any body can actually just cancel an election. Yes, that's all. If you eliminate that problem, then the rest will take care of itself. For example, I'm complaining about military conscription, right? Because I see these abuses that happens to the new soldiers who are being trained, and they get all these injuries, and then so basically you have the Orange Party putting up a campaign of ending military conscription. So they saw problems within society through democratic means, which is and then if they're pushed to not touch 112, they probably will not touch it. So there's a way to do all of this without the Constitutional Court. There's a social pressure thing happening for parties to adjust policies. You don't need the courts to use the hammer, and so having the courts means that you can do a military coup on the election results anytime, which is a problem. There are actual courts out there that does plenty of work, like the administrative court that just ordered former Prime Minister Yingluck to pay 10 billion baht. I mean, you still have that court. If a prime minister is corrupt to that degree, you can rely on other courts, actual courts, not the constitutional court. So just to me, I always say this: find the easiest way to fix the problem, right? If the problem is military coups, at this point, okay, they have kind of stepped aside, right? The other problem is the constitutional court. So if you remove this, things can operate. And you'll have checks and balances. I mean, you have plenty of checks and balances. It's not like what's happening in the U.S. So the problem is that the real problem you have around the world is democratically elected presidents who abuse power. That cannot happen with the prime minister, because the prime minister in Thailand does not have absolute power. So it's you're not going to get a guy like Erdogan, Putin here. It's impossible constitutionally. So the prime minister of Thailand has never had that much power, with the exception of a few during the time like Champon Paul. Champon Paul had that power, but there was another reason. But basically, you do have to worry about presidents who have too much power. You don't have to worry about prime ministers who have too much power. It's not a thing. It might be a thing for some country. For example, Cambodia. Hun Sen is Prime Minister Hun Sen, which is the reason why we have this mess, right? It's the soldiers are acting on his orders to invade into Thailand, because he is basically control every institution in Cambodia. So the system that Cambodia has at this point, all of that has been co-opted by Hun Sen. He actually controls the elites. He is the new elites. So basically, he actually controls the courts. You don't have a problem like that in Thailand. The opposite problem you have in Thailand. You have the inability of a democratically elected prime minister to carry out policies, and you also have this obsession that the government can fix economic problems, which it can't.
Can you explain more about that?
Because the thing is, there is this illusion among the electorate that, and I'm the only guy saying this, because no politician will say this. There's an illusion among the electorate that a democratically elected government, or even a non-democratically elected government, there's an illusion that you can solve poverty through governmental actions in Thailand. This illusion. And so every campaign season, you got politicians campaigning on doing this. Even military coups, they would campaign on this. But then the Thai economy on itself is basically run by the private sector. And then you got inequality problems. A lot of it has to do with a lot of things. But the Thai governments cannot actually
What about reform policy?
they can do a lot of policies, but I'm saying it's just this false promise every time about ending inequality. That will not happen within probably 150 years, to be realistic. It's not happening. I mean, okay, you can do a lot of things to help ease the inequality, help the poor, free healthcare and all that stuff. You can do that. But I'm saying the kind of message that that's presented by politicians on a daily basis and the kind of portrayal that the media has on these policies is to me is like all of it is a freaking illusion. It's like and then every time I get into the taxis, the taxi guy would ask me, when are we going to get a government that help eradicate poverty? It's like, fuck, why are you even? If you believe that you get a government that would eradicate poverty, you need to go take a class in Economics 101. It's not happening. You might get a government that would give you a bigger welfare check, but it's not going to eradicate poverty. It's not happening. There's an illusion among the members of the media on that as well. The most stupid thing I've heard is, back to this point. I'm trying to get the government to end conscription. And then you get politicians who say, we have to solve the economy first. When are you going to solve the economy? You'll die before you solve this economy. What are you going to solve? You're going to lessen the income gap. Okay. How are you going to do that? No, but I'm not saying there are things you have to do, like, crack down on the monopolies and help people access, funding to do projects, all that stuff. But it's not eradicating income inequality. It's amazing to me that the politicians can continue to say this, and then the media buys the bullshit, and then the people actually think that the governments will actually end income inequality. I mean, you need to take a class in economics to understand that ain't happening.
So now that we're on,
it's ridiculous.
Now that we're on the topic of the
you would amend 112. You could amend 112 and amend military conscription. That will happen, I guarantee you, before we eradicate income inequality in Thailand.
Part of my paper is also talking about Thailand's international security policy, and one generalization of just during Prayut, we weren't deemed as a legitimate democracy amongst a lot of foreign nations, right?
Okay.
And so if we had democratically elected leaders, that international legitimacy, could that also help revitalize the economy, boost international trade, etc.? So in a way, politics does have this effect on the economy, right? Especially with just legitimacy to Western nations.
Okay. But are you trying to point out that during the Prayut regime we were more closely aligned with China?
Yeah.
And that was
didn't really like us.
Yes. That was a result of a pivot by the United States and the European Union from Thailand because we had a military coup.
Yes.
But okay, now so all of that happened and we became more closely aligned. But to me, that was kind of like this superficial exterior of it, meaning that Thailand had still a very close military tie with the U.S., right? So we would have all this military exercise with them. And we have a very close ties at the at the state level with in as far as relationships back and forth on important issues. Okay, for example, if we arrest a member of Al Qaeda, and if the U.S. asks for extradition, we would help facilitate that extradition of that member of Al Qaeda. So that has not changed, even during the Prayut administration. But on the exterior of it, because of the anti-coup stance by the U.S. administration and the European Union, we had to become more closely aligned with the Chinese when it comes to trying to draw a closer economic partnership. Now, but basically, I think my answer to you is that, but don't read too much into that temporary leaning, meaning that in the long run, meaning in the long run, let's say when there's a really important issue of strategic significance, let's say if the U.S. and China break out into a conflict over Taiwan, Thailand itself is aligned with the U.S. I mean, like regime to regime. We're not with the Chinese. It's kind of like a.
Okay.
It's like there's more trade between trade between China and Thailand is strong, right? It's at almost the same level as the U.S., right? It's second. It's coming up, but then what I'm saying is that what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that eventually, during times of war, that U.S.-Thailand relationship is still strong, and we're a major non-NATO ally, and it would survive even the Trump administration.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is that we, even if it seemed like we, the European Union and the U.S. had to punish us and have, I think there's a technical term for that. When they issue, it's like they lower some sort of a standing for time. But they know that's like temporary. They know, I'm trying to say that in the long run, if there's an actual war that break out.
You'd always hedge closer to the U.S.
Yeah, we're with the U.S. That's not changing. Because it's a military to military establishment type of relationship. It's not, because that's just how it is. It's globally, it is structured that way, meaning that, for example, the Trump administration is trying to change a lot of things, right? But the transatlantic partnership is stronger than the current era.
Okay.
Eventually, the Trump administration will be gone.
Yeah.
And eventually, the transatlantic partnership will resume.
Okay.
Meaning that the US and Russia is forever an enemy. There will never be a day when the US and Russia is not an enemy. Geographically, it is always going to be enemies. So that grand partnership that Trump wants with Russia, and he wants Eastern Europe to be a major ally, and then he wants to discard Western Europe. That's only like a temporary thing under Trump. So I'm trying to compare that to this.
Okay.
So I never read in too much into this major Chinese stance. That was the exterior of what General Prayut tried to do, to show the world that, hey, we got a new partner and that China does not have a problem with Thailand. That was kind of like just a show to the world that we have this ally that is quite close to us as well, and they're willing to invest in Thailand. We can trade with them. Yeah, all that. But when it comes to long term.
So
I don't
what
see
about right now, especially with Trump's tariffs on Thailand.
Trump's tariff is seen as a temporary problem by but this is on the more important points. But Trump's tariffs is seen as a temporary problem by people who hold the long view that the U.S. would not have these tariffs post-Trump, and the majority of American businesses are aware of that. And the majority of exporters in Thailand are aware of that. They know that this is like a political thing in the US. There's a push and pull. And eventually it will get to a level whereby the Trump administration is only able to levy about 10 or 20%, nothing more. That's where it's going to settle, right? Most people are aware of that. Now, the problem might be if you want to focus on what's happening around the elites. There are some, I would say, pro-Russian provocateurs. There are pro-Russian provocateurs in local Bangkok intelligentsia that is trying to push, and these people are, and some of these people are members of the media. Some of these people are also former high-ranking military officers. There are local influential people trying to push buttons around circles of Thailand's elites so that Thailand becomes less pro-US and more pro-Russia and pro-China.
Why is that?
Because we're now in the post-Prem era.
Okay.
In the Prem era, In the Prem era, everything was secure. The alliance with the US is intact. In the post-Prem era, everybody is running around trying to create influential circles. You know, you got some pro-Chinese, pro-Russian provocateurs locally who are army officers, retired, and members of the media, and also former politicians. And these are folks with networks to Moscow and networks to Beijing. These are behind-the-scenes folks who are trying to make sure that Thailand, in the next 10 years, pivot into an anti-US stance. Now, these are folks who believe that the new centers of the world would be China and would potentially be Russia. These are the same folks who also believe that Russia is winning the war in Ukraine. And these are, now, I'm telling you that these provocateurs, media types, and also, you know, former politicians and former army officers are trying to become influential members. They're basically trying to become, in the post-Prem era, they're trying to vie for influence.
Yeah.
This is an ongoing fight. But in the long term, Thailand will not pivot that way. In the long term, the Thai-US partnership is strong enough to survive this disturbance. Same thing, the US regime itself will survive this Trump assault. It will survive this. But it's a similar thing that's happening. So the story I'm telling you is that there are folks who view that if we're going to lean towards more pro-China, China is the new center of the world, and Russia is trying to reorder, you know. That's a disturbance to the current US-dominated, you know, global hegemony. It's a temporary disturbance.
So do you think that the US will retain its global hegemony despite it declining during the Trump administration?
Yes. Basically, the Trump administration reinforces a view that American hegemony would only be threatened by a self-inflicted wound. So that basically only through a democratically elected process whereby you elect a horrible man who does not think about national interests, only through that you would get a decline, an actual decline in American power, which is what's happening.
What about China's rise?
No, China's rise is great. And it's a rise that has China coming on as a major stakeholder, as a trading partner. But China is not, to me, here's my take on this. China is not Russia. China is not a bad actor internationally. China can, with the US, have a positive win-win relationship. This is the problem with the Trump administration. The Trump administration pushes China to become a bad actor, when in fact that if the US did not pick this fight, they could coexist in the world whereby it would be a peaceful world. I mean, this is the thing about it. So I'm looking at things post-Trump. So China is a viable member of the globe and is a regional economic powerhouse that is a positive player in the international trading regime. China is not a threat to the US as a new militarily dominant hegemon. But China does have ambitions in Southeast Asia, but that alone is not enough to basically control the world, right? China does not have 7 major fleet across the entire globe. The US controls the oceans of the world. That's why it has the hegemony. So if you look at a time when China would have the kind of naval power that the US would have, that would probably be 100 years from now at the fastest to me.
Okay.
They don't have the superiority in air or naval power. That's why that fight is not now. It's like 100 years from now. But this current American decline is freakingly self-inflicted by a moronic administration who thinks that the US is in decline, right? The US is not in decline. Now, it has social moral decay within. That's not military decline. But what I'm saying is this. This is why it comes back to Thailand. It's all these influential types trying to get the Thai public, and I deal with a lot of this because I'm the guy. I was the pro-Trump guy on Thai TV, but then many analysts locally paint a very pro-Russian and pro-China view, and they actually see America in decline. But they mistake a temporary decline in the quality of the president and social moral decay. America has social moral decay from within, but it's not military decline. Military decline is different. Military decline is the ability to have a naval fleet that is not as strong as the Chinese anymore. The Chinese does have new Chengdu these jets, these fighter jets. They're pretty good. It's not bad. But the Chinese in 50 years could have better military planes than the US, but it would take 50 years.
And would that shift the hegemonic power?
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Military hard power.
Okay.
So we're not talking about like, but we're not talking about social moral decay, right? But on top of that, even the issue of economic strength, it's not even close. I mean, it's not even close. Economic strength, this is the most stupid thing. I talk to a lot of kids, and there's the kids growing up, and they consume all this garbage. They consume, say, India's GDP is like, China's GDP. I tell them, don't look at the GDP, look at the GNP per capita. Right? Okay. So, back to Thailand basically. So, I'm kind of, so things are not changing that fast. And then, No, but in a way, back to Thai politics, Thai politics itself is stable. It's stable in a way because nobody's going to throw out the constitutional court in the way that I wanted. So that's staying there, right? You're not going to have a coup either. And then then the Orange Party probably will not come to power. They'll probably devise a way to make sure that it does not come to power. So in a way, Thai politics could be boring. One of the things that you will find is that if your aim is to study politics for the sake of knowledge, it's great. Right? You study politics in the US or in Thailand and all this stuff. And you could work for a think tank and produce, great advice and papers and stuff. But Thailand itself is kind of, to me, staying put. We're not changing much. But we are an extremely livable society. That is a happy place. Okay. But we're not changing much. So if you expect a lot of change, then you would find, it's like, there's a local craze now. The local craze is that locals are defining Thailand as a failed state. Now, we're not. Most of the people who define Thailand as a failed state has never actually lived in a failed state. Yeah. Okay, so we're staying put. Nothing's happening. Things are not changing. The only things changing are things that are cool, like gay marriage, stuff that doesn't have to do with power.
Okay. I guess my one.
So don't expect change after whatever you write. Don't expect
But we're changing right now in regards to our economic policies towards hedging towards closer to China or the U.S. Because right now, U.S. is very unreliable.
We have more trade. We have more trade with China.
What about ideological competition between the U.S. and China? Are we leaning towards one more than the other? Because the Trump administration is so unreliable. So obviously our relationship with the U.S. at this moment is
okay. No, I mean, I think what you might want to, what might be happening. Yeah, but we already here's the thing, we trade a lot with the Chinese, but we have a major trade deficit with them.
Yeah.
So we import a lot of Chinese goods.
Yes.
And we don't export as much as we want to, right? So we import these mushrooms, this garlic, pakshi. I think, but anyway, a lot of this stuff we import. And then we take in a lot of Chinese products, including electrical appliances, where we export less. But what I'm saying, we would like to export more. Yeah. That would be good. But that's just more trade, which is a good thing. And I don't view having more trade meaning that we would be aligned, we would align with them in a case there's war.
Okay.
I mean, for example, if China tries to take Taiwan, and the U.S., I don't know, but when I'm saying, I'm trying to not link economic to security.
Okay.
Because I think economically we have to trade more and more with both the U.S. and China. We have to export more to both economies. We're not doing great on exports. We used to have a lot greater GDP growth because we had a lot of exports. Now the export numbers are horrible.
And
that's why we're not growing.
And how does Thai politics play into our number of exports? Or just the private sector holding power?
The private sector in Thailand is efficient, right? I mean, it's efficient. The government takes credit for things that isn't really.
The private sector.
Yeah, it's not. The problem is not this government. The problem is basically every government taking credit. Actually, the problem is the media believing the story when the government takes credit for GDP numbers.
Okay.
It's actually the biggest lie portrayed in the mainstream media. I mean, it's like I'm the only guy mentioning this. It's like it's so stupid. It's so stupid that you got prime ministers after prime ministers, and then like the media would say, "Oh, during this reign, GDP grew by 3%. During this reign, GDP grew." It's fuck. It's just. It's ridiculous.
Okay.
It's actually most of the people who do like the work. I mean, for example, like you got a guy who owns a company who export like frozen shrimps and crab, right? So he does the work in finding the markets, and he exports stuff. He deals with importers over the U.S. He's the one making the money, and he's the one making the export numbers grow to bring money into the country and to hire local workers. These are it's the private sector entrepreneurs who make the money and create jobs. Right? And so it's the same thing with the U.S. When the Biden administration, the Trump administration take credit for, inflation numbers or GDP numbers, it's like, it's for people who don't understand, who are not well informed economically. And then they watch the news and they start believing this stuff, And so, anyway, okay, no, but I'm trying to give you something that is, because you're trying to seek, but I can't comment too much on the whole interplay between unity and military coups and all of that. But the military establishment finds a way of surviving in Thailand. It's too large not to be powerful. So, for example, the Prime Minister does not get to select the armed forces chief, right? You could do reform, change the law so that the Prime Minister can select the chief of the army. But the minute that you push a change in that law, then you probably you'll find yourself out of office. I mean so the government is not touching that. That's another thing to watch for. If the Orange Party comes to power, will they amend the law that would allow for the Prime Minister to actually select the army chief? And I guarantee you that even the Orange Party will not touch that as well, because that's the unsaid. From what I'm aware, it's like things that the Orange Party things that you can't touch aside from 112 is the positions of armed forces chief, because the armed forces chief is supposed to be the final arbiter of conflict. Meaning that it can launch a coup only if the armed forces chief is not beholden to a democratically elected prime minister. So but I think that might answer your question as to why, like, you don't have to worry about checks on the prime minister. I mean, there are like, it's not. I got into trouble over this long time ago. I said that corruption is not a problem in Thailand. I mean, it's not that it's not a problem, but I'm saying it's like it's not a problem in Thailand more than it is in other countries. I mean, you have corruption in other countries that could be worse than Thailand. But Thailand is highlighted. Thailand's corruption problems are highlighted by the mainstream media.
Yeah.
And that paves way for many of the military coups in the past, intentionally as well. Some intentionally, some unintentionally. Meaning that most members of the media try to do investigative reports and do honest work, but then it leads to somebody else opportunistically stepping in and removing the prime minister.
Okay. Thank you so much for all your answers.
Okay.
One final
Okay.
question to conclude this interview. What are two kind of final questions? What are your hopes for Thailand's future, economically, socially, and politically? And what's one piece of advice you would give to young people like me who want to pursue a career in politics or foreign affairs? What would it be and why?
Okay, I think there's a lot of funding from many governments around the world for well-meaning international organizations that perform the roles that many governments around the world do not perform. So, for example, and this will come back to what I hope for Thai politics, meaning that I have many friends who I went to school with. I went to the School of Advanced International Studies at the Johns Hopkins University DC campus. And some of my friends joined the US State Department, some of my friends joined USAID. And some of my friends joined the World Bank, the IMF, and the UN. And most of these friends are really, good people. Good people like philanthropic people. People who would never in their life want to have power or even money. These are people who want to go work for non-governmental organizations in Africa and help the poor. So I had these friends in grad school. And I think that if you are into politics, and if you're in international relations, the route to go to make a change in the world is really international organizations that have the money to do projects to help impoverish people around the globe. Now, but the problem is this. The problem is that most people who go into politics, who go into the study of politics, or the study of international relations, like you or I. We go in there because deep down we have this interest in our own nation, and that we want to forcefully, or gradually make a change in our nation so that the country would be better overall. Now, but the problem is that when you come back home, it's not clear on what you can do. If you finish your studies and if you get a job at the World Bank, there could be a grant available to pursue a project on water irrigation in Bangladesh. I had a friend who worked at USAID, and the guy was doing the projects in a poor country, helping with clean water. So there's a clear amount of money and mandate to do something, right? Okay. But then if you come back home, if you want to pursue changes, it's kind of difficult. Meaning that after a while, it's like you need to find a way to make money, right? Okay. And to have a secure job. And then at the same time, you have to find a way to make sure that you have the ability to have an influence on policy. Okay, but what happens normally is that in the midst of all of that, you just end up realizing that in life, you need to find a job that would make you adequate money to live a pretty good life. So what happens is that most well-intended people who are into politics or study politics, after a while living in Thailand, they either start a business whereby they get another job, trying to earn a respectable salary. Or they get into politics and they don't get to pursue change, and then they run out of money. And then they have to try to find a way to make money while in politics. So basically, my advice is to find a good, secure job in an international organization when you can. And eventually, honestly, this is what happened, because when I heard when Pita said that when he was young, he wanted to be UN Secretary General, right? I heard him say this in an interview, and I'm thinking, really? I mean, like, if you have a degree from a respectable university, you got to execute all those opportunities you have abroad. Collect the experiences and the money that you can before you want to pursue whatever the change you want to pursue back home. Because I guarantee you that the problems that you want to pursue back home in Thailand will remain here for you to fix whenever you decide to end your job at whatever, this is not a joke, but I have this guy who is, he used to work at an investment bank, Goldman Sachs. He had a great salary. He got, and then another guy who also graduated from SAIS, he worked at Citigroup. All these people, they earn a lot of money, but then they get burned out after like 5 years. One guy actually comes back and raises chickens at a farm. So what I'm saying is that stick to the goal of wanting to make Thailand a better place. That's a good thing, to aim for the long term. I'm still aiming. I'm just using whatever I have at this point because I'm doing YouTube. Stick to that goal, but along the line, make sure that your career is enhanced, and you're able to make some money and then get some experience. And then eventually pursue some changes in Thailand. But if you're young and you don't have the power yet, and if you don't have the money yet, it's difficult to pursue any changes in Thailand. Find an opportunity at an international organization first, if you can, and then eventually, the transition back to Thailand will be smooth, and you'll be ready. Because most of the people, by the time, if I almost messed up my career. Actually, I messed it up when I joined politics a bit too early, because I should have stayed in the media until I was more established. But then I had kind of like a second wind. My second wind was with Voice TV. They kind of let me do my thing. And so I got to do my thing after I failed in the Bangkok gubernatorial elections. And so, but basically it's like, you have one round at politics, most people. And then your name is tarnished along the way. So you got to make sure it's like the last thing you do. That's all. That's my take on it. So all these things I'm talking about, I'm still aiming for it. But in the meanwhile, I'm just chilling out, making my comments.